Did you know that you can go from reloading pages all the time on your Shopify store to loading content dynamically without a page reload at all, and therefore increase your overall shop performance? Welcome to Shopify's Section Rendering API. What's up, my nerds? It's Bozy, your Shopify developer freelancer from Germany, and in today's video, it's all about the Section Rendering API. In my last video about the cart API, I quickly showed you how you can re-render a cart drawer after a cart action with the bundled section rendering, which is basically using the Section Rendering API. With this video, we dive into a more general approach to section rendering and re-rendering content. First, I'm explaining to you what the Section Rendering API is, how we use it, and why we need it. Then we jump into a super basic example where I can show you hands-on how the Section Rendering API works. After this, we jump into the most common real-life examples. Re-rendering collection products after pagination and filtering. And lastly, I'm going to show you how you can re-render variant information on the product page after a variant switch. As always, keep watching because in the end, we're going to apply our knowledge and build this cool quick view for every product in a collection page. And that without never leaving the actual collection page itself. Disclaimer, all the code I write in this video, I'm going to put into a repository. So if you want to work along with me or just have a look, go check out the description. Now let's jump right in. What is the Section Rendering API? When we go to the documentation, it states that you can use the Section Rendering API to request the HTML markup for theme sections using an AJAX request. But what is so special about having the HTML markup for sections when you can initially render them on page load with Liquid? By requesting the HTML markup for a section after the page load, we can dynamically replace content on a page without reloading. Let me explain. Imagine this. You are on a collection page and the collection page has a pagination. So you can jump from page 1 to page 2 to page 3. These pages all have different URLs. So when you click a pagination button, you jump to that URL and basically reload the whole page. First of all, this takes time, and second, it's a huge performance issue because you are reloading the whole DOM with every click. Now, instead of going to the page, we can simply request the HTML markup for the collection section of that URL. We stay on the first page, but we get the content of the second page. Then we can just replace the first page collection products with the second page collection products. Now you have the new collection products without reloading the page at all. There's even more examples to this. The same applies when you are filtering a collection, re-render a cart drawer when you add something to the cart, or re-render the product page based on variant information. But how does it actually work? You need two things. First, since it is an API, you need to make a call to an endpoint. In our case, we are using fetch requests. Second, you need the ID of the section and add the ID with the sections parameter to the fetch call. To show you how this works, let's go to a very basic example. For this, I'm going to start my development server. If you don't know how to develop locally on your machine, go check out my video on the Shopify CLI and learn how to do it. To show you this, I went to my super basic blank theme and created this section render liquid, which is a section super basic with this container here and a button. Now what we want to do is when we click this button, we want to render a section. As I said before, we now need a fetch call with the section ID. First of all, let's give this button an event listener. To select it better, I give this a data render attribute, and then we can select it in the document. And after selecting it, we can simply go ahead and say button add event listener and a click. And in here, we just simply want to console log button for now. When we open our theme now and click the render button, we see that it logs button, so this works for now. Now what we can do is create a basic fetch call. To make the fetch happen, we need an URL to fetch initially. Like I said, we need the sections parameter, but what is the URL? In the documentation, we can read sections can be rendered in the context of any page by appending the section parameter to any page URL. So we can do this when we go for the root page, or we can also request a section section in the context of this collection. For now, since this is a basic example, we can just use the root. And to keep local-aware URLs, so if a shop has multiple languages and currencies, we should use the Windows Shopify routes root object. We can do this, and then we simply add these sections search parameter. The section ID is really easy. It's just the name of the section. In our case, we want to render the hello world.liquid section. So the ID is hello-world. We can put hello-world, then we put it then. And typically the response you get by this fetch call is in JSON format. So we can return response JSON. Then we add another then. And for now, we just want to look at the data that is getting responded. Let's go again to our shop and click the render button. Now we get this response, which is an object with the hello world key, and the value is the whole HTML markup of the hello world section. What we can do now is take the basic render container and put the HTML in there. Let's go ahead and say document query selector. Then we select the basic render container, and this inner HTML is the data with the hello world property, the whole HTML markup. When we go ahead now and click render, we have the hello world section now rendered in here. You did your first section rendering API call and rendered a section. Pretty cool. Now we dive a little bit deeper because there's more to it. Maybe we don't want to have the whole section now rendered inside of here. We only want to render this text. There's a neat little trick you can do. Because you get the data, which is the whole HTML markup, we can do the following. What I like to do is create a temporary div, document create element. The temporary div is just a empty div we can use as a placeholder for now. Because what we can do is take the temporary div, say the inner HTML is the actual data with the hello world parameter. Log this temporary div. So when we go ahead again and click the render, now it's not an HTML string anymore, but a whole HTML element. This allows us now to select stuff inside the HTML markup in case we only need specific elements. We can go ahead again and say document query selector, basic render inner HTML is not the whole data now, but the temp div, query selector, and now we just want to put this welcome description. We can say welcome description inner HTML. Now with a click of a button, we should only see the welcome section. When we reload now and click it, now we only render the welcome section. Super cool method when you don't need the whole section elements, but just specific ones. You will see more specific use cases to this later. What I want to show you next is how to render multiple sections, because the documentation states that you can render up to 5 sections simultaneously. To show you how to render multiple sections at once, I just deleted this. Then I created 2 more containers where we say we want to render hello world here, we want to render product list here, and I also created this product list section, pretty easy, which displays 4 products of the collections all collection with an image, the product title and the price. Now when we go to the documentation again, we can see that we can simply request multiple sections by separating them with a comma. We can therefore go back to our fetch call and put a comma here and then take the new section ID, which is product-list. Then we want to console log the data again. When we click render, we can see now that we have 2 parameters in our response object now. For every section, there is 1 parameter in the response object where we can access the HTML for that section. What we can do now again is say document query selector. And because we want to render the hello world in here, we can take this inner HTML and say this is data hello world. Then we can do the same thing. Let me quickly close this. We can take the same thing for the product list. And here we render the product list. Let's reload again, close this and render, and we can see, okay, the hello world is here and below we have the product list. So we rendered 2 sections simultaneously. Here, of course, you can do the same with the element selection again. In this case, you could do temporary div, create an element, and the same you can do temp div product list, and temp div inner HTML is the data hello world, and the temp div product list inner HTML is the data product list. So now you have two HTML elements again where you can select stuff and replace specific items if you want to do that. I showed you before how to request only one section, but there's actually another way to do that. Just to quickly show it to you. Instead of putting the sections parameter, you can also use the section ID parameter to just request one section. The only difference is here that sections rendered in the response of the section ID query parameter are returned directly as HTML, not as JSON. So in this case, we can simply turn the response.json into response.text. And when we console log the data and click the render button, we can see with the response, you get the whole HTML string of that section. Just keep that in mind. Now I want to show you the difference between statically rendered sections and dynamically rendered sections. In the example of our Hello World section, we used a section that doesn't have any section settings. But what happens if we have section settings inside a section? For this, I just created this image with text section, which has an image, title, and description section settings. When we go back now to our fetch call and put image with text in here, because that's the section ID, and also put it inside our section again. Let me close this real quick. When we click the render button, we can see that we get a liquid error, but also hello world and I'm Bozy Dev. By using the section name as the ID, we are rendering a section statically. As stated in documentation, you can't specify section setting values through the Section Rendering API. By rendering the image with text section, we just simply take the default values of that section, which we have none for the image, Hello World for the title, and I'm Bozy Dev for the description. There's also another problem. I quickly added two image with text sections inside the editor with section settings, so with images, titles, and descriptions. What if we want to render the shoe section now or the helmet section? Again, when we click it, still we are rendering the default section because we are using the section name as the section ID. There's actually another way to determine the section ID for a section. We can also extract the section ID from the section wrapper. If we look at our section, we can see that every section in our Shopify shop has a section wrapper. And the idea of that wrapper is Shopify-section- and then the section ID. Therefore, you can simply get the section ID by using this. You can also get the section ID by using the section object. Let me show you real quick with the image with text. Here we just output the section ID and the section object. If we render now, we can see we have the section ID of that section in here. We can now simply use this section ID to render the shoe section. Instead of using the section name, just put this in here. And also don't forget to put this in here. And when we click the render button now, we can see that we get the shoe section. We can also do this, of course, for the helmet section. Just replace this with the section ID of the helmet section. And when we click the render button now, we get the helmet section. This is how you get dynamically rendered sections. Just be aware that section IDs can change, so hard coding them like this is maybe not the best idea. Always make sure that you get the section IDs dynamically. Now I want to show you how to render a section in a context of any page in your shop. For this, let's try to render the product section on the homepage, because we have this product section in here. And when we render this now, you can see this. So you have something in here, but also a liquid error again. This is because the product section actually relies on the product object itself. And since we don't have a product object on the homepage, we get this. What we can do now, instead of using the root URL, we can use a product page URL. We can simply put products in here. And then we need the product handle. And to get the product handle of the snowboard shoes, we can simply go here and copy this. When we reload and click the render button now, we can see that we get the product section of the snowboard shoes. So in the context of the snowboard shoes product page. The same thing you can do, of course, for the snowboard helmet. So when we take the snowboard helmet handle and put it in here, when we click now, we have the product section of the snowboard helmet product page. And you can do this for every page in your Shopify store. For the last thing, I want to revisit the Locale-aware URLs because it's super important for URL building. As you can see, I'm using the window Shopify routes root object if I want to build my URL when accessing sections from another page. Because imagine this, you have an English, Spanish, and a German market in your Shopify store, and all markets have different root URLs. And by using this, you always guarantee that you have the right URL for the call. The same thing goes if you want to load a section in the context of the current page. So imagine you are already on a product page and want to render a section of that product page. You can simply use the window location path name. So just put it in here. Then of course you don't need this anymore if you are already on the product page. Just be aware to use these objects to always get the right URL. That was it for the whole basics of the Shopify Section Rendering API. Because this was just a very, very basic example, let's dive into real life examples now. I will not show the Section Rendering API in the context of rendering a cart drawer because I already did this in my cart API video. So if you're interested on how to handle cart actions and building a cart drawer, go check out the video. Let's first have a look on the collection page. I just simply created this super basic collection page where we have the collection products and a pagination. This is also in the section here. We have the paginate, we have this pagination here with the parts. And when we click on these paginations, we get to the next products. What you also might notice is that the page always reloads when we click this. This is super fast reloading, but in my theme is basically nothing. So this is not the case at all. Also imagine if you would have this super long text on top of the collection page, and every time we want to visit a new page, we jump back up and then we jump back up again, which is super frustrating for the customer. What we want to do now is re-render the collection products without actually reload the whole page. And for this, we can of course use the Section Rendering API. So let's do that. If you don't know what custom HTML elements are and how to use them, watch my video on them and learn how to get more efficient JavaScript. For this, let's wrap the pagination part in a custom HTML element, pagination component. What we also need to do is create a new asset. Let's call this pagination. And then of course, we also need to link the script inside of our collection. Now let's create our pagination object. Right, I created my pagination class now, defined it, and also console log pagination works in here. So let's check if this is working, and we have pagination works. What exactly do we want to achieve now? Since the pagination always visits new URLs because every page has an own URL, we first want to prevent the default action for this link element. What we want to do in this case is take all the links, we select all the links inside of our pagination component. When we jump back to the component, we can see inside we have these anchor elements, and for each link we want to add a new click event listener. So we say this links for each, so link add event listener, of course click because we click on it, and we can say we want to call the this handle pagination button function, and of course we want to bind this. And in the handle pagination button, since we also have the event, we can now say event prevent default, and then we can console log event prevented. Let's try this again. When we click our pagination, we don't visit the new page and we get the log event prevented. This is the first step. The next step is we want to exchange the old collection products with the collection products of the page we are actually clicking. So before we can call the fetch, we first need to have the URL. And when we go back to the elements, we can see that every anchor element has an href with the actual URL. So this is really helpful. And since we have the event and we click on the links, we can simply say that the URL is the event current target href. Let's console log the URL for now. When I click it, we get these URLs, and this is working perfectly for now. Of course, now we need to add the sections parameter. In this case, it's a little bit tricky because the pagination already adds a search parameter of page. So we cannot simply add another question mark for the search params, because this is generally a little bit tricky to handle because we have so much stuff in URL. I like to do the following hack. The URL is actually a new URL object based on the event current target href. Just to show you real quick what the URL class is doing, it creates and returns an URL object from a URL string. For us, this is super helpful to construct the real URL with a sections parameter without doing any string shenanigans, etc. Because what we can do with the URL object is URL search params and then just set. And here we can call the name of the search param, which is in our case sections, and the section name is collection. Remember, we can use the name of the section as static, or we could also use the section ID. Just to show you real quick how we would select the section ID, we could simply append a data section ID attribute with the section ID. And inside our pagination custom object, we could say get section ID. And here we could just return this data set section ID. So we can say collection or this section ID. Just to quickly show you that this works, we can do this section ID, go back and click the buttons, and we can get the section ID now from the collection product section. Now let's go back to our fetch call. We can do fetch. Now we have the URL, but we have to turn it into a string again, because now it's an object. We can put this into a string and get the URL. Then we do the same as before. We take the response. Since we're using the sections parameter, it's a JSON response. So return response JSON, and then we can say data. Let's console log the data again to show you what is happening. When we click on the pagination button now, we again get the response for the section ID with the HTML markup. Now we can simply replace the collection products. When we go back now, we can see that the whole section has a lot of elements, and what we really need only is use the collection inner, because we don't need to reload the title, etc. In this case, we can use the hack that I showed you before. Let's create the temporary div and say document create element div. And remember, we take the temp div inner HTML and say this is the data, and now we can simply say section ID, because we already have it here. Now we can go ahead and say document query selector, because it's outside of our element. Here we can take the collection inner class, inner HTML, and replace it with the temporary div, where we save the new HTML markup of the new page. Query selector, close this again. Also collection inner, and there the inner HTML. Now when we go back and click on the second page, the products get re-rendered, also the pagination, because it's also in the collection inner, and we don't have a page reload. Let's do it again with the big text in front to show you the impact. With this huge text, we go here and we stay at the bottom because we are only re-rendering the collection products and we don't jump up and down. Okay, let's remove this again because there's one more thing to do. It's a little bit hard to show, so let me do this a little bit here. So as you can see, when we click on 2, the URL doesn't change, but actually we are on page 2. Here we are on page 3, and here we are on page 4. So actually there would be this page 2 for the page 2, page 3 for the page 3. The problem is that because we are not reloading the page, or we're not going to that page and just reloading this section, we are on the same URL. But what if a client goes to a product page and then comes back to the URL and is suddenly on a different page? We don't want this. So the last thing we have to do in this case, because the URL is changing, is update the URL. First of all, we have to take the URL, then again access the search params, and here this time we delete the sections parameter. Now we can do the following. We can do window, history, push state. In here we put this empty object, the empty string, and then our actual URL to string. Reload now, and I click on 2. Now the URL also changes accordingly. So when someone is visiting the page and goes back, he's on the right page. This is also super important for the customer journey, so you have to keep implementing this when the URL actually changes. Now you increase your performance of this pagination by 1,000,000, and that's not where it stops. So let's look at the filtering of collection pages. To show you this, I created this super basic filter element here with 2 filters, material and dimensions. And when I click these, nothing happens. And this is basically just a simple for filter and collection filters, and then an input with a label. Filtering is a super complex thing, so I cannot go into detail in here, but let me know in the comments if you want a full tutorial on how to create a full filter system for your collection page. For now, let's just accept that when I click these, nothing happens. And the basic thought of filtering is that you can append your filter values to the URL, and that's how you get the filtering. You have a URL to add the filter and a URL to remove the filter. You can also find this in the Liquid documentation for the filter. So when we go to a filter value, we have a URL to add and URL to remove. And as we know, this is super important to have for the section rendering API. To give this some functionality, I again wrap this in this collection filters element with again the data section ID, because I know we already use it later. Then we go to the assets folder and create a new JS file, collection filters. I put this back a little bit. And then of course we have to implement it here again. And then the next step, of course, create our class again. And in here, it's basically nothing else than we did with the pagination, but instead of links, we have inputs because it's not a link we want to click. The customer should be able to select a checkbox if you want to filter or not. The only difference is then we don't listen for the click on the link. We listen for the change of the input. Let's call this filter options. And in here, I just query selector all inputs with the type of checkbox. Then of course, for every filter options, we want to add an event listener, not for click, but for change. And here we say this handle filter change, and of course bind to this. Then in the handle filter change, we of course have the event. And because this is not a link element, we don't have to prevent the default. Now to get the URL again for the fetch call, we do the same as before. We say const URL. And now since we have a checkbox, we have a checked or an unchecked state. When I check a filter, I want to use the add URL. And when I uncheck a filter, I want to use the remove filter URL. We can do this by simply check if the current target is checked. Let's get rid of this again. Here we can say new URL. When it's checked, we take the event current target. And as we saw before, it's the data add URL. So data set add URL. Because the add URL is just the last part of the URL, we have to add the window location origin in here so the URL object can be created. And then of course, otherwise we do the same thing, but with the remove URL. Then we can do the same again. We can say URL search params because we want to add the sections parameter. But in this case, let's use the section underscore ID parameter to request just a single section. And here instead of the section ID, let's use here the section name to show you this also works. And then we write the normal fetch request. We have the URL again to string. And because we are using the section ID, remember, we now get the text response. But other than that, we just create the temporary div again, put the inner HTML to the actual response, and then replace the collection inner again with the temporary div collection inner. And of course, don't forget to delete the section ID again from the URL so you can push it to the history. When we now reload, of course, we need to rename this. I just copy pasted, my bad. So collection filters, and collection filters. We reload now and click a filter. You can see that the collection gets filtered and also the pagination is still working with it. Now that I showed you every case on the collection page, let's move to the product page. To show you how we can use the Section Rendering API to change variant information, I created this super simple product page layout where we have the name, the price of the variant, and a variant selector, and also the inventory of that variant. All of these variants have different prices and inventory, but when we change the variant, we can see that the information is not updating. To do this, let's now again use the magic of the Section Rendering API. As we can see here on this product page, we have this select your variant selector, and to give it JavaScript functionality again, let's wrap it again in a custom HTML element. You know the drill. Let's call this variant selector and also close it. Then of course, again, create the JS, variant selector JS. And in here, of course, create the class again. Right, created the class. And of course, we need to implement in here. As we can see, for every variant, we have a input type radio. So what we want to achieve is on radio change, we want to get the current variant and then re-render the product section. Again, let me increase this here because how Shopify is actually knowing what variant is selected is again by looking at the URL. You can manually select a variant by appending the search parameter variant and then the variant ID of that variant. So when I do this, the variant changes to S. This is super helpful for the URL generation for the fetch call. And the variant ID we actually save in the input. So what we can do now is just listen for the input, get the variant ID and create our URL. So let's do that. Let's create our connected callback. And here we can say this selectors, this query selector, all, and again, all inputs with the type of radio. Then of course we take the selectors. For each selector, we want to add an event listener again. Here it's also change. And the callback is this handle change. And of course, bind to this. Same thing again, handle change, event. And again, we don't need to prevent the default because it's just an input and no link element. Now we come to the URL. Let's create the URL without the URL object this time, because this time it's pretty simple. We just take the window location path name. Don't forget, it also states in documentation, just for the local-aware URLs, use the window location path name. And then, as shown before, we take the variant parameter, say this is the event current target value, because the value of the input is the variant ID. As I can show here again, the value is the variant ID. And of course, also we need the sections parameter, and we want to fetch the product section. All right, now that we built our URL, we can do the fetch call. Let me also close this again. And in here, it's nothing else than we did before. We again create the temporary div. Then we take the div inner HTML is data product. Or if you just want to fetch one single section with the section underscore ID, take the text and then just put the HTML in here. It doesn't matter. And then we can see what we want to replace is actually the product content, because we don't want to replace the images for now, just the product content section. Let's say document, query selector, product content, inner HTML. We want to replace with the temporary div, query selector, product content, inner HTML. I just saw that I did a small error. It's not a question mark and then another question mark. Here it must be and sign because we already have the question mark. When we reload now and change the variant, we can see the price is updating in the inventory also, because we are re-rendering the product page depending on the variant ID. As always, when I show you the URL, we can see that the URL is not changing, but we need to change it. Here we could just simply use the URL and remove the sections string. But again, I just transform it in the URL object, delete the sections parameter and window history per state with the new URL to string. And here, when we switch the variant URL also gets updated. And when we reload now, we also land on this variant. It's nothing else than we did before, just the variant creation is the important part and which sections to fetch. For the last part of the video, I want to give you a little treat. Let's take everything we learned and create a quick view for every product on a collection page. Let's go. To show you how this works, I went back to the collection page and created these quick view buttons. I also created a quick view snippet, which is basically a custom HTML elements, which has an overlay, an inner and a close button and a content container. And this quick view custom HTML element is just a modal that opens when I click this button. So I have these open buttons, which are the buttons on the collection page. And when I click these, I say handle click, and on handle click, this open drawer, I call it drawer, you can say modal, it doesn't matter. And now when I click this quick view, this opens, but nothing happens. So pretty basic. What we want to do now is when we click this button, open this, but with the actual product form of that product. What we can do is, of course, use the Section Rendering API, take the URL of that product, get the product section of this product, and render the content inside the view, and then open the quick view. I already have this handle click, so instead of just open the drawer, before we need to re-render the actual content of the quick view. And to get a product by its URL, we just can take this here, but it's not collections featured, it's /product/ and then the product handle. What we can do is, for every button, we can add a data product handle attribute. And inside, we just use the product handle. And this works because we are looping through the collection products with the product variable. When we now reload and check the quick view button, we can see that the button has the handle for this product. Now we can create our URL again. Now we can say the button is event current target, and the product handle, just to show it to you, is button dataset product handle. Then we can just construct our URL. Here we can simply use the window Shopify routes root, because in this case we cannot use the window location path name because that would be collections. We want to construct it ourselves, and to just be local aware again, we use the normal routes root. And in here we append products, because that is the URL path for product templates. Then we use the product handle, and of course, then again a question mark, and let's just fetch one section this time again with the section ID is product. So this means we are fetching the product section of this product and get the HTML for that. Now let's do the fetch again with the URL. And don't forget, this time it's text again because we are using section_ID. Don't forget to return the response as text because we are using the section_ID again for just one single section. Now we want to insert the HTML into the quick view content. And as you can see, we already selected it here. This content is this query selector quick view content. And now it's pretty simple. We can just say this content inner HTML is HTML. Here we don't need to select any elements because we want to take the full section and put it into the content. And lastly, we can put this open drawer functionality in here. After everything is done, then open a drawer. Now when we reload and click the quick view button, now we can see that the product form of this product is in here. When we close it and use the snowboard shoes, now are the snowboard shoes in here, and here's now the snowboard in there. Crazy, right? On the collection page, you have access to every product without ever leaving the collection page itself. And don't forget, if you don't want to show the picture in here and just this, just go ahead with the temporary div again, just select the product info and render it inside of here. This shows you the real power of the section rendering API, and now it's your turn to get creative. This was a big topic again. And also this time, I hope that I could explain everything to you well. But if you still have questions about this, let me know in the comments and I will get back to you. And as always, I would be really happy if you would subscribe to my channel because I take a lot of time creating these videos because I want to teach you something and make you better as a Shopify developer. If this is not enough for you, I'm actually working on my own Shopify Developer Academy where I want to teach you how to become a Shopify developer or at least better at it. So if you're interested in learning more, go to the description, click the link and sign up. Lastly, of course, you can join my Discord community where I try to build a community solely for Shopify developer. I think we already solved over 40 problems for Shopify developers. If you want to come hang out or ask questions, go to the description and join. See you next time. Bye bye.